Hi, everyone. We'll get started momentarily. We're just going to give everyone just a minute to get in. We're also live on Facebook. So if you're having any technical difficulties, you can also check us out on Facebook. But we look forward to the great conversation ahead. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amanda Decker, and I am the Senior Development Officer for Constituent Relations and Advancement Operations. I oversee alumni relations here at the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. And we're so honored to be hosting this conversation with Professor Renee Smith-Maddox and Representative Karen Bass, a 2015 alumna of the School of Social Work here. If you have any questions for our panelists or any technical difficulties, use the chat box to engage with one another, and use the question and answer panel for any questions for our panelists. I am going to hand things over to my colleague, Ron Rubalcaba, to talk a little bit about admissions here at the School of Social Work. Ron?
Thank you, Amanda. Good evening, everyone. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Ron Rubalcaba. I am the Assistant Director of Admissions and Recruitment for the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. Wanted to briefly chat about some of our programs that we offer here at the School of Social Work. And so the first program I'd like to talk about is our Social Work and Juvenile Justice minor. We do offer a minor. It's designed for USC students who want to increase their knowledge of the juvenile justice system and the various service environments for diverse youth populations. Now, this minor is fit for students in the behavioral and the social sciences, or any student simply interested in developing a broad knowledge of issues in the field of juvenile justice. The minor is of particular interest to students wishing to pursue graduate studies in social work, as well as law, sociology, psychology, public health, and education. The required courses for this minor: institutional inequality in American political and social policy, juvenile justice in America, adolescent gang intervention, and community experience in juvenile justice environments. Now, in addition to that minor, we do have a progressive MSW program. Now, this progressive MSW program is specifically designed, once again, for USC undergraduate students. This program allows a student to earn both their undergraduate and a master's of social work in as few as 5 years. So undergraduate students who have completed or are in the process of completing the minor, they're highly encouraged to apply. Applicants who have completed the juvenile justice minor will complete less than the 60 units normally required for the MSW program, again, as few as 5 years. We also welcome applicants from other undergraduate students here at USC who, again, still can complete the degree in the less than the required 60 units for the MSW program. Now, in addition to those two programs, we do offer the Master's in Social Work in a number of formats to meet your needs. For those with a Bachelor's in Social Work, we do offer a 37-unit, 1-year advanced standing MSW. This program does start in the summer 21. And so for those fall applicants who are looking to get started in the fall, we do offer our traditional 60-unit MSW program. We have a 2-year option for students who want to go full-time. We offer a 3-year option for students that want to slow it down a bit. Those programs offer courses in the fall and spring only. In addition, you're going to complete 1,000 hours at 2 community-based internships. Now, in addition to the traditional 60-unit MSW program, I'm very excited to offer the Working Professionals MSW program. It is a 7 consecutive semester program. It's 28 months. Courses are offered in the summer. You have guaranteed evening courses with a very consistent schedule, one that's very important to a working professional. This is a hybrid program, meaning that you're going to take some courses online. You're going to be taking courses on campus as well. So you're going to have the best of both worlds. You'll be able to be part of the campus community, as well as having the flexibility that you need as a working professional. You will do 1,000 hours of internship. Now, this will include both a virtual training and a community-based internship for a total of, again, 1,000 hours. Now, in addition to those programs, we do offer a number of dual degrees. We partner with the School of Law, Business, Gerontology, Public Health, Public Planning, Public Administration, and Nonprofit Management. So if you're ready to learn more about social work, the social work profession, and how you can make a difference in your community, whether you want to inspire, empower, and advocate for marginalized populations, then I would encourage you to reach out to us. Visit our website, or you can email me at apply.msw@usc.edu. Shortly after this, I will provide some information in the chat box so you can click on those links and learn more about our program. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Renee Smith-Maddox, clinical professor at the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work, and tonight's moderator. Thank you, and fight on.
Thank you, Ron. Wow, such timely and informative programs here at the Suzanne Dworak School of Social Work. The time for social workers have come, and we need you. Thank you for being here this evening. Welcome to our conversation series. I am your host, Renee Smith-Maddox. I'm a clinical professor and the diversity liaison for the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. Our conversations this month are designed for you to meet inspiring African-American change makers who improve the world every minute of the day with their perspectives, with their courage, with their tenacity. They are living examples of servant leaders, social innovators, public scholars, and advocates. They are people who get into good trouble. Black history is 365 days per year. Black folks have been change makers, liberators, and thought leaders behind every major movement in this country, and they have contributed to the global stage as well. It is time to recognize their resilience, their wisdom, their ingenuity. It's time to celebrate and be inspired to action by the contributions of African Americans. A little tip, well, more than a tip, a little insight if you didn't know, Dr. Carter G. Woodson was a change maker. He created what is known today as Black History Month. But he also used independently published media to center the contributions of Black people throughout history in public discourse. He knew that he had to find a way to get our history out to the world. Diversifying education and media is just as important now as it was then. I hope today's conversation encourages you to keep pursuing new sources to learn and unlearn. With this new source of information, we get to write new narratives about America's history. This month, We laud heroes like Carter G. Woodson, John Lewis, Elijah Cummings, Shirley Chisholm, Marsha P. Johnson, Martin Luther King, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, Cicely Tyson, and so many others who came before us and made our world a better place for everyone. Their courage and activism should serve as a call to each and every one of us this month and every month to fight for the promise of equality on which our nation was founded. This is a 1-hour conversation, and this conversation is one that's very special to me because I had our guest as a student. But before we get there, I'm almost there. If you have any technical difficulties, please let us know. The text box is being closely monitored, and that is also the place and I should say chat box is closely monitored, and also that is the place where you could put your questions. We will have a question and answer session about 10 minutes before we close out this evening. I am so excited to welcome our guest, Congressmember Karen Bass, my representative. She represents the 37th Congressional District, and she's been doing this work for a long time, but she's been in this role since 2011. She's an advocate and a champion for social justice, children welfare, universal health care, immigration rights, and police reform. I want to just open it up. And Karen, I am so happy to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to see you as well.
Yes, it's been a long, long time, but always connected. So this is our moment to get caught up. So thank you again for your time. I know things are busy where you are. We're under new management in this country, and a lot has been happening since January 21st. And I thank you for being in the position that you're in and always advocating for what is right and fair and just. So let's start. Let's just jump in and let's kick it off. Black History Month, what does it mean to you?
Well, Black History Month, as you said, Black history is 365 days a year. And I think that is so important because one of these days, we will begin to, one, actually incorporate Black history into the curriculum. But to have a month where we can just focus on the issues that are significant to the Black population and our contributions to society is extremely important.
Absolutely, absolutely. With so much going on, and boy, 2020 was a difficult year for us all. It's hard to believe that we could say we've been living in a pandemic for almost a year now. And of course, in your arena, a lot was happening. But given all that's going on, what's inspiring you?
Oh my, well, so much is inspiring me now. I mean, the idea that we do have new leadership in our country and it feels like the temperature has gone down. We can all like exhale. We don't have the daily assaults on our psyche like we were having before. 2020 was just an awful year. And the thing that just breaks my heart though, is that we lost 400,000 Americans. And it should be a lesson for all of us in leadership or the lack thereof. When you do not have a leader, or when you have a leader that is self-absorbed and is not focused on the good of the people that they are leading, then we need to understand what happens. What inspires me always is the next generation, all of the activism that we saw last year, an issue that I've worked on for decades, police violence in the community, and to see the entire world respond and the change that that is bringing about. So I am always inspired by activism and by the fact that even when we're going through tough times, people are willing to stand up and they're willing to fight for the type of change that we need to see in our country and even within our city.
Absolutely. I mean, I just feel that this is the dawning of a new movement. It's
Right.
a social movement without a doubt. And in bringing this up, what are some of the projects you've been working on? I've been keeping an eye on what you're doing, but I want you to tell our viewers some of the projects you've been working on, because it's so important for people to see what you do in your role, because sometimes people don't understand.
Well, and rightfully so, they don't understand, because if you turn on the evening news, you don't have any idea what we're doing, because unfortunately, the evening news is really an opinion, whether it's the opinion you agree with or not. But what goes on in Congress is never really covered. And so what I am working on, what I've been in a flurry of working on all day today, and as soon as this is done, I have more Zoom calls to do, and that's the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that we're going to vote on again in the beginning of March. And so doing all of the work that I need to do to make sure that that passes again, that we get it over in the Senate. And this time we have a president that is waiting to sign it, a president that started his administration putting racial equity at the core of it, a president who chose Kamala Harris, African-American, South Asian woman, to be the vice president. That's just a signal of a new day. Today, for example, I started off my morning introducing comprehensive immigration reform, the U.S. Citizenship Act that a group of us introduced. And the Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, Asian Caucus, Native Americans, everybody came together to introduce this piece of legislation. I'm also working on a big bill around criminal justice reform that focuses on women. I always work on foster care. I was listening to the juvenile justice major that you have now. So I want the country to begin to question, frankly, the entire juvenile justice system. Why do we have a juvenile justice system? All that we know about brain science now. So what's happening in California, you know, the juvenile prisons were shut down. Juvenile justice is being moved into human services. So I plan to this year introduce legislation to get that ball rolling on a federal level, where we begin to question, how do we deal with juveniles that fall into delinquency? Do we punish them, or do we look to help them? A fundamental question that we have to answer.
Yes, the time has come for some very progressive diversion programs that don't just lock our young people up, but really help them transition from what they're going through, and help them heal.
Right.
Fundamentally heal through the trauma that they have experienced, and help them transition so they can fulfill their destiny and really contribute to society and be a member of their community. Wow, such important work. We know our immigration system needs an overhaul, and it's so good to hear that you are pushing that along. You know, the priorities that you just outlined are, you know, sometimes people would say bold and progressive, but I'm just saying this is what we need. This is what
Exactly.
we need right now. So in listening to the kind of work you do, because people may not realize, those who are just joining, that you know, you are a social worker, you have an MSW from our school, and to really be able to hear about the work you're doing, people can see that path, see this policy advocacy path and how it could unfold. What's your thoughts on how we might train social workers to work with African American and multicultural communities?
Well, let me also say that I did attend the program in my second term in Congress. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to work on transforming our child welfare system. And so I felt that I wanted to really dig deep and learn what the role of a social worker is. I worked in the medical field, so I was used to medical social workers, but it was really illuminating for me in joining the program, because at my core, I'm an organizer and an activist. And when I got involved in the social work profession, it's like right at the core of what the profession is. And so, you know, it's an opportunity for social workers to be involved in the area of policy and to take the day-to-day experiences that you have in terms of training social workers to work in a multicultural environment, in an African-American environment. Immerse yourself in the community. And I don't mean just an agency that you go to work in. If you go to work in an agency, that's wonderful, but learn about the community where the agency is based. Drive around the community, build relationships, learn about the history of the people in that area. And I think that is the best way to teach someone. Direct experience. It's not about reading something. It's not about just practicing within the agency. It's about going out and learning the neighborhoods, learning the environment, learning the history.
And I'm so glad that you said it's not just touching the neighborhood, driving through the neighborhood. It's really immersing yourself in the neighborhood, talking to people in the neighborhood, understanding the history of the neighborhood, who's in the neighborhood. And
Right.
the thing as I'm listening to you, Karen, oh, may I call you Karen? Is how important it is to look at these communities as assets,
Yes.
as strengths. And so it's so important to connect in the way that you are suggesting. You mentioned earlier about the Biden-Harris administration and their focus on racial equity. How might social workers help advance that racial equity agenda?
Well, first of all, I think people need to learn what racial equity means. People need to, one of the things that we suffer from in our country is, number one, we don't even know our own history. And we don't know our own history because we only like the good stories. We only want to hear about George Washington's cherry tree. We don't want to hear about the 300 human beings he owned. And learning the history, and then also the other thing that we don't know how to do after so many hundreds of years, we've never learned a way to talk about race and be comfortable with it. And I think that you have to understand that yourself before and while you're out promoting racial equity. Understand what you're talking about. And then there's basic ways to understand and to learn the history. You know, I tell everyone that, I mean, there's a couple of documentaries that are done. 13, the number for the 13th Amendment, is an amazing documentary that you can get on Netflix that tells you the history of policing and relates it through the period of enslavement. The average American has no idea that enslavement lasted for 256 years and don't understand why Black people still talk about it. Or that for 100 years after the period of enslavement, there was apartheid or Jim Crow. The fact that affirmative action lasted for a nanosecond before it was attacked and virtually eliminated. So I think learning and understanding is one of the most important ways to, number one, understand what racial equity means, and then you can fight for it.
Well, thank you. I want to echo that. You know, this is like, let them hear it and let them hear it again and tell them again. And I'm hoping for our viewers that what Congress member Karen Bass is sharing with us is this power of understanding the history and understanding what has to be unlearned, understanding what these terms are. It's not just a trendy thing, racial equity.
Let me mention one other thing, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about race in our country, we always talk about it like it's an individual belief, feeling, issue. As long as we talk about it like that, as opposed to examining the structures of society, people feel guilty. They feel like, oh my God, did I do something? Did I say the right thing? Look, that's always important, but it is secondary to the barriers that exist in society. That's what systemic racism mean? And let me just give you one example because it's going on today, right now. And that is the achievement gap in education. Okay, we know it exists. Well, now we have millions of kids of color in this city who are not in school for an entire calendar year, not millions in LA, hundreds of thousands, who are out of school for an entire calendar year. So if there was an achievement gap before COVID, what do we think it's going to be after? Now, I'm not sure what's going on in some of the elite private schools in our city, but I have a feeling they figured it out. And that the education inequity is structural. So if you are an essential worker and you have to go to work every day and you can't sit and Zoom with your 7-year-old child, then that's inequity. So there needs to be extra attention given there. That's no one individual's fault, so there's no reason for you to feel guilty about it. But that's structural racism. And so we have to figure out how to examine society structures without people feeling like, oh my God, you're saying I'm a racist. Because then you can't even have the conversation.
They shut down, and then that gives rise to throwing the hands up and saying, I can't do anything about it, but there's something for everyone to do. And I think that it's so important to understand what systemic barriers look like and to unpack them and to interrogate them and to really see how the gap. So when you talk about that achievement gap, it rolls right into the wealth gap.
Mhm.
And families are impacted tremendously, especially again, what COVID has shown us. And I like to say we're going through twin pandemics.
Right.
COVID-19 and racial inequality, where we know, you and I know, it's been with us since the dawn of time, but there's a time of reckoning now, and you can't turn your head anymore and ignore it. And this is so important, the pieces that you are bringing up, because again, the inequities, the gap just gets wider and wider. So I want to, for a moment, I mean, and you've been doing it throughout this conversation, at least for me, what are the priorities? I know you have priorities within your own work, but what would you say is our collective priorities, and what's the call for action for the field of social work?
Whew.
I know that's a
I mean, I really think that we can't get past COVID right now. I mean, COVID has to be the focus. Another structural inequity is who's getting these vaccines. And right now, people are saying, well, the reason why Black folks and Latino folks aren't getting the vaccines is because they're hesitant. That's crap. The reason they're not getting the vaccines is because there are structural barriers. If you don't have a computer or you don't have email, then, or you don't have a car, then you can't necessarily get a vaccine. The economic devastation that is taking place, the mental health toll, and we're not even talking about that, the suicides that have happened. And so I do believe that for all of us in the country, COVID has to be the #1 priority right now. And then I think social workers could play such a crucial role by illuminating the inequity that we just talked about. I mean, let me give you an example. The city council person, Marquise Harris Dawson, representing the 8th district, the way he is getting vaccines to his constituents, he's doing it in secret. Why? Because people from the west side of town are coming into South Central, taking up the vaccines. And so he's phone banking in a neighborhood and saying in 2 days, we're going to give vaccines out at such and such park. And so people show up. And so social workers can be directly involved in that. If in your internships where you're working, you hear about this, you can help take that extra step effort to help people get the vaccines or to help get the resources that we're going to be voting on in a couple of weeks. I believe next weekend, we will vote on the massive rescue package. And that's going to put money in people's pockets. And social workers can aggressively get involved in that to make sure the constituents are getting the resources. And then my bias is to try to encourage you to be involved politically by talking to your elected officials. So if it isn't working, tell us how it isn't working. Tell us what needs to happen.
Speak up, folks. Let your representatives know. So we know on this particular show, some of the viewers may be prospective or emerging social workers. What's your message to anyone who's considering a degree in social work? And for some individuals, it may be at the master's level, and others, it may be at the doctoral level.
Well, no matter which level you are, or no matter which area you go into in social work, I just can't tell you how much you are needed. I mean, you know you're needed for your clients, for your patients, for the people you're interacting with. You know that. But I just want to plead with you as to how much you're needed with policymakers. Because understand something, we make decisions about your profession, we make decisions about your clients. A lot of times we're making those decisions in a vacuum. There are very few social workers that are sitting in Congress with me, or in the city council, or in the board of supervisors. And so if you don't speak up and get involved on behalf of your clients, if you don't interact, then you will essentially be in a passive mode while we make decisions about you and about what you're doing and about your clients. And so your voice is absolutely critical.
I hope everyone heard that. Amanda, I want to switch for a minute because I see quite a few questions in the chat, and let's at least tap into some of them so we can open up the conversation.
Absolutely. So one of the questions is, what advice would you give to other MSWs and future MSWs who are interested in developing and implementing policies that can improve the lives of Black communities?
Well, one, I would suggest that you have a lot of opportunities to get involved in social justice organizations that are right in the Los Angeles area. We're very lucky because we have an abundance of them. But two, I just can't say enough to talk directly to your policymakers. A lot of times people don't reach out to us and so we don't know. But I would strongly recommend that. I would also say to you and to your students, if there's any follow-up that people want to do specifically with my office, reach out. If a group of you want to get together because you have some specific recommendations, call us up. We'll do a Zoom call with you, since that is our way of life now. I know all of us are tired of Zooming, but it's actually helpful because we're able to get a lot more done. I mean, I could be in my office in Washington, D.C. I'm in LA right now, but I could be in my office in D.C. talking to you. And so I would suggest that you get your recommendations together and let us know about them. The other thing too is that what I know, a lot of times people don't know much about government. And so just do a little homework first, because some of the recommendations might apply to the city, to the county, to the state, or to the federal government. And you can find that information out on your own. And then let us know. And then if you have difficulty reaching out to your elected officials, we can help you do that as well, because all of us know each other, talk to each other, work with each other all the time.
Great. Another question that someone asked is, how does the proposed rescue package address the inequalities and need for community-based COVID vaccines?
Community-based what?
COVID vaccines?
Oh, so on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus, Latino Caucus, Asian Caucus, and Native Americans, we have been advocating since the beginning of the pandemic that we knew there was going to be a disproportionate impact. And so there needs to be a disproportionate response. That is equity, which means that it needs to be targeted with increased resources to our communities where there is a disproportionate impact. And so you will see that in this rescue package. which means there needs to be additional vaccines, but not just vaccines. There needs to be trusted messengers, people who can assure the community that the vaccine is safe and encourage people to take it. Again, I think there's a little too much attention to the hesitancy, and I'm worried that that's an excuse to say, well, the reason why you guys aren't vaccinated is your own fault because you were hung up on something that happened 70 years ago, the Tuskegee experiment, which frankly, the Tuskegee experiments is symbolic, emblematic of what goes on every day in the medical community with African Americans and other people of color. Anytime Serena Williams and Beyonce almost died in childbirth in the richest country in the history of the world, and they're gazillionaires, the problems with African Americans in the medical community is not just subject to your socioeconomic status. It's across the board.
Great. Our next question is, could we expect greater commitment by this administration and by Congress to allocate higher R&D budgets for programs that promote diversity, equity, and research through federal agencies such as the NIH, SAMHSA, and others?
Yes, I do believe that. And by the way, I mean, one of the things that we did with all of the caucuses that I just mentioned, because in the last administration, we know where they landed on race, which is on the side of white supremacy. But anyway, what we did is we went outside of the government. We recruited a diverse group of researchers to look at the health, social, and economic impacts of COVID. We went out and raised the money from philanthropy. So sometimes now the government should have paid for that, but because we had a hostile administration, we went out and did it on our own. But I'm completely convinced that an administration that begins by putting racial equity in the very first week of the administration is going to adequately fund research and development looking at health disparities.
Wonderful. You know, Congress member Bass, I wanted to know what's happening on the Hill with regards to reparations.
So that's going to be an interesting question. There was a hearing on reparations this week, actually, in my committee. I serve on the Judiciary Committee as well as the Foreign Affairs Committee. And so we had a hearing on reparations. We will probably be voting on it. I'm not sure what happens after that. I don't know that it will go anywhere in the Senate because frankly, in the Senate, you know, there's only 3 African Americans and there's no African American women. Now that our senator was elevated to be vice president, there's no representation from Black women. And so with 3 African Americans out of 100, I don't know if reparation makes it to the president's desk. I will tell you that the bill, HR 40, is a study. It's not a bill that says we're giving reparations, but it's a study. And unfortunately, everyone understands reparations in some instances, but not when it comes to Black people. We gave reparations to the Japanese. We absolutely should have done that. Everybody understands reparations that have taken place in Germany with Holocaust survivors. But when it comes to Black Americans, again, because this country has never acknowledged we enslaved people for 256 years. And in fact, the last administration attempted to whitewash the curriculum even further. Number one, the story isn't told to begin with, but they wanted to tell less of the story by saying that slavery's existed since the beginning of time. Oh, well, we had slavery here. We're no different than the rest of the world, where the slavery that existed in the United States was profoundly different than slavery that existed in prior times. And then, of course, enslavement continued in different ways after the Emancipation Proclamation. And some would argue, as Brian Stevenson so eloquently argues, that slavery evolved. It was never eliminated.
It's still happening today. Amanda, question?
Yeah, yes. So Kathy asked, can you update us on any child welfare policies being enacted to reunite children that have been separated at the border?
Oh, don't even get me started. I think that is one of the most egregious things I've ever seen in my life. I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday, and I really believe it classifies as a crime against humanity that should be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. My heart just hurt every day thinking about those children. I've been to the border. I've seen them in Texas. It was just a horrific crime that was committed by the last administration. So in the bill that we voted on today, I'm not voted on, that was introduced today, the U.S. Citizenship Act absolutely addresses the reunification of those children. I have legislation, because you may or may not know, but the federal government is not required to reunite those children. And I believe very deeply that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of those kids that are, who knows where they are in the United States. I think they lost track of them. And I believe that the United States, number one, should be held legally responsible and should give punitive damages to the families, because all of you know as social workers, the damage that those children suffered is lifelong trauma. And we should pay for it. To me, it reminded me of what we did to Native American children when we took them away because we wanted to essentially train the Native American culture out of them. When we took African children, African American children away and sold them. And it registers on that level to me.
Got any more, Amanda?
Did Amanda freeze?
I think Amanda might have froze. Yes, she did, but we will keep it going on our end. So as I'm listening to your activism that is continuous and the work that's being done, from your perspective, what will be accomplished? How can a school of social work support the progression of policy advocacy?
Well, I think that the school, one, can give us data and information. I mean, I'm even looking in the chat now, and Alyssa Torres writes, at crisis text line, we saw increases in domestic violence and child abuse. That's a direct correlation to COVID. Now, I know that happened, but I don't have any information. I just know it happened because I know that it was going to happen. But you have the information, you have the stories. Elected officials, people often think that the way to impact policy is to give us a bunch of data. Data is important, but your stories are equally important, because you got to grab somebody emotionally. When somebody comes and presents a bunch of data to me, you can imagine I might have 20 meetings in a day. If you think I remember the data, or do you think I remember one of your stories from one of your clients? That sticks with me, not tons of data and charts. And so that's why when I say that you're the experts in policy because you're living it, and the input that you can give to somebody like me is priceless. And even, you know, I mean, I know substance abuse has been increased. I know all of that because I know that that's what happens, but I have no information.
So the door is open, folks. You've heard it. You know, the stories that you have come to know, the narratives you have written, the data you have access to. Congressmember Bass needs that. That's invaluable input. The other thing that's invaluable and powerful as I'm looking at this chat is the kind of connectivity that is happening, that people are saying, reach out and connect with me. Leslie Johnson at Community Coalition, people are to join forces. And this is how a movement starts. So we have our own movement starting right here in the chat. Amanda, any more questions as we move towards closing out?
Yeah, so Matthew asked, there is so much work for social workers to do on the meso, macro, micro levels. And you mentioned how badly we are needed in our communities. As an MSW, sorry, the question just went away. Oh, sorry, here it is. As an MSW, what is being done to fight for the social work profession? Issues with unpaid internships, undervalued and underpaid graduate degrees. What are your thoughts on unionizing as nurses and teachers have done?
Unionizing social workers?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, I think that's very important. A union is power. And I think that that's important. I also think that there's a lot of places where social workers are unionized. So I deal with SEIU all the time. I deal with AFSCME all the time. Lots of social workers there. But I also think that you can have power whether you are in the union or not, because if you are in a facility that doesn't, or an agency that doesn't have a union, you can still come together. You can come together and you can address management. So I think, you know, people might be afraid on an individual level, but if you go together, and then it's always, I think 99% of the time, it's a question as to how you make your presentations and how you deal with management. Diplomacy gets you a lot further than going in a way that is, you know, confrontational.
And that gives rise to coalition building, and that gives rise to action taking place, that gives rise to new practices and policies. You have to speak up. You have to find your voice. You have to figure out how to frame it and how to present not only the critique of the system, if you will, but you have to have solutions as well. It goes hand in hand. Mary Houston wants to know, do any of your initiatives look at reducing the use of private prisons and detention centers from unauthorized immigrants, particularly children?
Oh, yes, another issue. I mean, I think that there are some things that just shouldn't be privatized, period. I mean, it just shouldn't. Because if you have a private prison, your motive is you need people in the prison. So I think it was in 2019, one of the private prison companies sued the state of Arizona because their census went down. So they didn't have enough prisoners. So, you know, what happened, one of the first things that President Biden did was canceled, or he's going to cancel the contracts with the federal prisons. Now, it didn't include the immigration detention centers, but we will get there because none of us support that. And none of us, at least on my side of the aisle. I think when a study is done of what happened in those detention centers in this past administration, you are going to find all kinds of corruption and abuse on every single level. And that was the thing that was so painful over the last few years, was knowing that was taking place, but not being able to do anything about it. I do think we're going to have to give this administration some time, because the president had to come in and address COVID. I mean, COVID in the detention centers, you know, people are catching COVID and probably being deported so that they could deport COVID. You know, just the level of cruelty that went on in the last administration will go down in history.
Absolutely. Congressmember Karen Bass, you've taught us so much. I love your energy. I love the work you do. It inspires me every time I can get close to really understanding your agenda and sort of figuring out how I too can get re-engaged in the work of advocacy and community building. So much needs to be done, and it is clear. And so I hope that this is the first of many conversations. This is going to be a productive year for you and your colleagues. I'm glad you're there representing us. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conversation. And everyone is just saying, thank you, thank you. We are proud of you. We love you. We appreciate you. And we know that things are going to be better. It's going to be better because what you stand for is what democracy is all about.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And know that you can call on me anytime. I really wish, and look forward to when we can do this in person. But, until then, we'll do it this way. And let me just say to the students, what you're doing is just so important. And sometimes in the work that you do day to day, you don't necessarily feel valued. But know that we value you. We need you to be out there. I desperately need your stories to back up what I might know in my gut, but I don't have the information for. Let me give a shout out to Leslie Johnson and say, fight on.
Yeah. And I'm going to give a plug for USC's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Week, which is coming up March 8th through 12th. I've had the pleasure of co-chairing that event for the past 5 years. There is going to be over 100 trainings and workshops designed for students, staff, faculty, and alum. So you're welcome. You're going to hear a lot about it. Just pass the word on, and I'm hoping that you will find something in that week to help you grow and learn. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Congress member.
Absolutely. Thank you too. Great to see you again.
Thank you. Amanda, I'm volleying this to you.
Thank you so much, Renee, and thank you so much, Representative Bass. This is a weekly series, so we'll be back here next week, next Thursday, where we will have Professor Emeritus Barbara Solomon, as well as DSW alumna Simone Walton. So be sure to sign up for that. It's on our website. And I will include it in the follow-up to tonight's event. So we hope to see you back here. It's at 5 o'clock next week. And I put a link in the chat box. If you haven't signed up for the Dworak-Peck Connect networking platform for students and alums and community members, we welcome you too. I highly encourage you to check it out because it's where we post events like this and a lot of our trainings and some exclusive events like our social work alumni sessions where we bring in alumni for one-on-many networking nights. So be sure to sign up. And as Representative Bass said, everyone, good night and continue to fight on.
Fight on together, folks. Good night.